but speaking in the greater context of the system, they're pretty close to the same effect.
That does not mean he used gold to do it. We do not even know if he ingested the Larazium bead.
He definitely stole it.
At this point, we cannot possibly know his motivations.
Guess we'll just have to wait for a standalone book.
You don't think he could come here, do you?
I watched the new video. Ah, see, good hi. I'm doing fine. How are you doing? Are those new glasses?
Do you like them? Ah, yes, C. Would you like to join us? We were just talking about—
Not really.
I just watched the new video, and I have a bit of an issue with it.
You mean to tell me that Worm's objectively best premise isn't—
Not that one.
Oh, you mean the poetry— Wait, you're 2 weeks behind on my channel?
Very well, C. I would be intrigued to hear your input. Can I use the lens?
So you're saying we won't just hear it?
No, stop. Please.
We'll see it.
Stop it.
Don't you mean—
Oh, no.
Cease? No. Alright, what are you here for?
So, you and A established that poetry and prose are two metrics by which you can measure any piece of text, correct? Correct. A piece of text doesn't have to be poetry or prose, though a reader can call it such. Rather, poetry and prose are applied to it in an analytic sense. You use the example of analyzing a story as poetry to determine its poetic elements, but you never did explain how you would analyze poetry as prose. For instance, what if we took the two-stanza poem The Second Coming? Viewed through your poetic lens, it's a well-built and deeply meaningful poem, utilizing all sorts of devices that poetry values. Cadence, enjambment, imagery, parallelism, and more. It's efficient and structured, as poetry should be. But, if it were analyzed as prose, what would we gain from all that? Prose does value a number of those things. I do not think we would call it bad prose, merely strange prose.
But prose values all those things less than poetry does. For example, prose doesn't value the line breaks at all, so all the enjambment is immediately lost.
Enjambment? It's when you stub your toe.
No, it isn't.
I have exhausted all the logical devices at my disposal to determine what it is, and I am now using the optic lens to cheat. Ah, okay. That does indeed make sense.
Well, I'm sure you could have figured it out contextually. Is no one gonna tell me what it means?
Quiet while deliberators are speaking. Now, back to the matter at hand.
Yes, if you accidentally alliterate or rhyme words the wrong way in prose, it sounds weird. So prose values rhyme and alliteration negatively sometimes.
Well, prose values sentence structure, which is perhaps the equal representation of line structure?
But not the same thing. If you took that text as it is, it's just horrible prose, which I think misrepresents it.
But no, it does have representations. I'm sure if you just made some alterations to your concept, then
prose has nothing that it values that adds anything to poetry when you view it through that lens.
You don't... It's not... Stop it! It's simply a framework for mental exercise and analysis. A and I found a way to agree on it as a potential tool.
But in terms of the debate, you're back at square one, because poetry and prose aren't good metrics to analyze each other with. Prose is just an absence of poetic elements, so any prose that's analyzed as poetry looks bad, and any poetry that's analyzed as prose just looks bad too. So now I've shown that agreement hasn't been reached.
No, we were right. Logic and feeling agreed that both metrics were valid. Otherwise, there is no value to prose.
I think you're right, B.
You do?
You do. Absolutely. But I think the fact that you're using phrasing like analyze prose as poetry or whatever shows that you're still not thinking about it right.
If you think that we shouldn't categorize things as poetry and prose...
Oh, that's fine up to a point, but there's a ton of middle ground. A mentioned stories using paragraph breaks as line breaks, which puts it more towards the poetry end. But he also mentioned Dr. Seuss, who seems to toe the line even more. I mean, are Dr. Seuss books poetry or prose? And what about songs? What about lyricism? Is that poetry, prose, something in between?
True, but song lyrics also have the caveat of being in context of music, and are a metric unto themselves. Good song lyrics are measured by how well they have rhythm and flow, which are aspects of poetry. But even their rhythm is measured against the rest of the song's rhythm. You do not simply flow, as the kids would say, you flow on top of a beat.
B, we are the kids, you realize. I'll admit, songs are their own beast, but that doesn't mean that we can't analyze them as literature.
Doesn't it? Things in a different context should be analyzed separately.
No, Jay's right on this one, at least according to the Pulitzer Prize organization, which was willing to give their award to rap lyrics.
So we found a new metric by which to analyze text. But still, You haven't actually articulated your argument for prose, Jay. No matter what's in between the 2 or 3, prose has nothing going for it that poetry doesn't.
I think it absolutely does. For poetry to be viewed negatively when analyzed as prose, there must be something that prose has going for it, right? There has to be some value that's making it that way. And it's not an irrelevant or arbitrary one. Prose has clarity.
For you see.
While efficiency is the primary value in poetry, I'd argue that being clear with what you're saying is prose's equivalent. It's much easier to immediately grasp an essay than it is to grasp a poem because the purpose is to clearly state things, bring quick understanding. In a sense, there are many poems that don't care if you understand them, or might write in things that only certain people will understand. That's why you can spend the same amount of time analyzing a 164-word poem as a 5,000-word essay. They might say the same amount, but you have to do the work for the poetry yourself. When you take an essay to a teacher for correction, they might say, "I didn't understand what this meant," and they'll be cool with you adding a few sentences of clarification. Poetry, meanwhile, will all be about cutting out whatever isn't absolutely required.
What about story structures that intentionally obscure things from the reader, leaving them in a state of confusion?
Well, the entire text has to be analyzed, so as long as the reader eventually does understand what the author wanted to say, it can be evaluated as good prose, or at least having this good prosetic element.
You cannot just make up words, Jay.
Have you even watched my videos? Dr. Seuss is a great example, actually, because his stories are both easy to understand and efficient, containing elements that are highly valued by both metrics.
You just said yourself that poetry doesn't value clarity, but prose values efficiency. So maybe they're still not equal metrics?
I never said they were exactly equal, and maybe they're not, but while prose regularly sacrifices efficiency for clarity, poetry does the opposite. They're both valuable.
Fine, I'll take my leave. I know when I'm beaten.
Did I just out-debate an optic deliberator?
We aren't called that, and you had help.
I had help? You're the one who needed help.
Very well. But, Jay, we introduced a third metric here.
Yep. Jay's the name, and making shit up's my game.
But besides sounding good in the context of rhythm, what does this metric value?
Well, fuck if I know. But as a songwriter, I might want to figure it out. Not right now, though. I got too much worm shit going on.
In addition, you still must determine what you will do with the transmission.
Aw, you do watch my videos.